Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss how the government are starting to come clean about the trading realities of Brexit and how you should perhaps take a close look at how it will affect your job this year. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, there are quite a lot of strands to this discussion. So in this video, I actually want to focus very much on the impact it will have, particularly on you, and less about the politics, which I could cover in another video at some point. So, after being told that there would be no checks at our borders on goods from the 2016 referendum campaign to the 2019 general election campaign, the government are now saying that checks are not only going to happen, but inevitable. Of course there will be checks, say the double speakers, who told me I was being dumb for suggesting that there would be as recently as I don't know, a few days ago. But it's fine, they say. Well, it's not fine. And it's not fine for a couple of major reasons. First of all, it means that goods coming into the country will have to pay customs duties. Of course. Those have to be paid by someone. The suppliers won't absorb the costs because that reduces their profits to the point where they go, well, we can get more money trading those goods inside the EU. So they won't be exporting to the UK. So that inevitably puts the cost at some point on consumers, us. And when you consider that the commodities that we are most immediately concerned about are food and medicines, we're talking about the poorest in society suffering. And I'm not talking about prosciutto or any of this other middle class fare. I mean the staple foods that everyone needs. As for medicines, then, given that the NHS has only limited amounts to spend and an ever reducing amount to spend on these, it'll mean that it'll be unable to afford some products and therefore some treatments at all. And the second reason this matters is time. If you look at customs checks at the border between other third countries in the EU, they take a long time. Enough time, in fact, that the just-in-time supply chain is put under severe pressure. And this is what could cost you your job in 2020, never mind 2021. The just-in-time supply chain is based on the notion that most businesses cannot stockpile. They cannot afford to do so. Not only do they not have the money to be able to buy lots of raw materials in advance or have the storage space to hold them, but they have to react to orders that they're getting. They can't afford to order in a load of raw materials and then, well, with the orders they're getting, there's a load left over from that and we're not actually getting to use it. Can't afford that level of wastage. So when they get an order, they themselves need to order in the raw materials they need to fulfill that order. That order arrives the next day, they can get cracking on it, get it out, get it to their customer in a very quick turnaround time. Now, that company is going to face severe delays on getting their raw materials through. If at any point in that supply chain, doesn't matter about their suppliers, if at any point in that supply chain, trade with the EU is involved, which it almost always is. In addition, they'll get a double whammy if their order, at some point again in the supply chain, whether it's them having to do it or the next level up, requires dispatch back to the EU because there's delays on the way out as well. So whereas you might have a turnaround of like a couple of days now, it will turn into a week or more. You are no longer able to compete in the just-in-time supply chain and the business collapses and you lose your job. And it won't necessarily happen next year, as I say, because as it becomes apparent that this is going to happen, your customers or the customers of your customers somewhere along the supply chain are going to start looking for more reliable competitors in the EU. They won't wait until you can no longer supply their orders on time. They'll move early to avoid disruption. In fact, some businesses have already started to do that rather than risk having major disruption to their business with a sudden change. But I compare the time that these checks will take with other third countries that have borders with the EU. But that's not actually a fair comparison. We must be fair because our checks will take much longer. Because you see, those third countries have a couple of advantages over us. The first of which is that they already have border systems in place. We do have border facilities, of course we do, because we trade with other third countries on WTO terms and those things need checking. We don't have free trade agreements with everyone. But we have nowhere near the border facilities to cope with the massive extra demand of goods coming from the EU or from other countries with whom the EU has a free trade deal. People in the industry tell us that the capacity required would need to increase by 100-fold. Literally, at the moment, we only have the capacity for 1% of the checks we're going to need in 2021. We haven't expanded at all. We've known this for some time, but we haven't done it. The civil service are clear that it is impossible to do this by the end of the year, even if we'd already started. But we haven't already started because this is a change in official government policy. Official government policy until very recently was there's not going to be any checks. Now, of course there's going to be checks. What have you done about it? Nothing. The second reason, the second advantage that these other third countries have is that their customs arrangements are fairly stable. That means that whatever documentation is needed is familiar to exporters and hauliers. You know, they'll now have a system to be able to transport goods as efficiently as it's possible to do outside of the EU. You know, not the case within the UK. Nobody is familiar with the systems because the systems don't actually exist yet. They haven't actually been finalised. They're only starting to come through. The paperwork needed is only starting to be shown to businesses. You know, and those systems are going to keep changing as the madmen in government keep changing our customs arrangements. They're boasting about the fact they're going to keep changing our customs arrangements. That means the documentation will keep changing. That will mean checks will take even longer due to inadvertent mistakes and unfamiliarity on the part of exporters, hauliers, and even the customs officials as they keep trying to adapt to an ever-changing system. And if the checks start taking days rather than hours, then you won't get many of those goods at all. Food spoils. So that means we won't be able to get enough of it on our shelves. European drivers will turn down jobs to the UK because they don't want to be stuck in a queue for days on end away from their families. It's already a fairly unsociable job. And again, if you work for a company or even own one that relies upon goods from the EU, then your job is in severe jeopardy because those checks will apply in the opposite direction as well. And also, if they are going to have lorries stuck for days on end, and it's with products that don't spoil, so they could do that, that means those drivers need paying for longer, which means the cost of the transport goes up. So that's extra cost that's going to be passed on to the consumer, making that business in the UK less competitive, meaning it goes out of business. And despite all the Brexiteers crowing about how few businesses actually trade with the EU, so it doesn't actually affect very many at all, that was ignorance of the highest level. That your business may not trade directly with the EU doesn't mean it doesn't depend on it. All businesses, every single one, are part of a supply chain. And if one link in that chain collapses, so too might other links further along the chain. Half our trade is with the EU, so by definition, most businesses are dependent, whether they know or not, directly or indirectly, on trade with the EU. And smooth trade at that. So I hope I've explained a little bit about the serious repercussions of what the government are now having to admit to. And if it doesn't wake people up now, let's wait and see what happens when it becomes undeniable reality. So I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, then please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I will see you later.